Welcome to all of you to this session of the EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Ketki Ranade from the Center for Health and Mental Health, School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Bombay. Today I am going to be doing a module on homelessness and mental illness and interventions in this context. This module is part of a larger course on mental health. I will start with what are the course objectives and what will we be talking about in the next 20 to 25 minutes. The primary objective is to engage students with the range of processes and legislative reforms involved in designing or developing approaches that address the poverty, homelessness and mental illness nexus. So that's the primary idea that we will be engaging with today. In this module I'm going to be looking at homelessness and mental illness and what are the kinds of interventions and responses that can be made. One of the first barriers, or what I would refer to as systemic response to the needs of the homeless, and one of the major barriers in being able to make this effective response to the needs of homeless mentally ill persons has been actually in the legislation in the mental health sector, what used to be called as the Mental Health Act of 1987, which had several sections for admissions of persons with mental illness to the mental hospital. In this Mental Health Act, that is section 19 of the Mental Health Act, provisions for admissions under special circumstances were made, wherein basically if a person would see a wandering mentally ill person on the streets, the Act provisioned that it was possible to bring this person into the mental hospital through using this particular section of the Mental Health Act. Now what we have seen is that there has been a great deal of vagueness to how this section is going to be used, and that has deterred many service providers from being able to employ this section well, thus leaving several homeless people on the streets in the same state without any kind of treatment, or they were being referred to other kinds of institutions like jails and prisons, where they would get picked up under the Beggary Prevention Act and then get put away either in a beggar's home or in some kind of a jail or prison, or sometimes in other kinds of state-run homes for the destitute and the old people, or in sanatoriums or palliative care units. So basically one of the problems with the systemic response to the question of homeless mentally ill persons has been that there has been a what we call as a trans-institutionalization, where you have the homeless mentally ill person, instead of being in a mental hospital or in a mental health care facility, would actually do rounds of various kinds of institutions but not receive any kind of care. And one of the problems, one of the reasons why this is so is that the Mental Health Act had this provision, section 19, which was not clearly understood and therefore not very much used by mental health professionals. Having said this, that this has been a systemic problem in being able to address the question of homeless mentally ill persons. There have been other kinds of issues. So, for example, in 2010, Supreme Court mandated that there should be at least one homeless shelter for every 1 lakh population. Now, what we see in the country is that large part of the country, these shelters that have been formed are mostly defunct. In many places, these shelters don't exist. We have more than 3 lakh homeless people in the country, and this number is sort of ever rising, and the existing facilities are clearly not in a position to meet the requirements of the homeless population. What are some of the specific challenges with respect to working with homeless mentally ill persons? So one of the issues is about homelessness and destitution and people who are living on the streets, and a large population amongst the homeless persons is also persons with mental illness. So what are some of the specific challenges in working with homeless mentally ill persons? Some of the unique challenges that are present in front of service providers is the first question about rescue, rehabilitation and treatment. In order for a mental health provider or a healthcare service provider to be able to reach a person who has homelessness and mental illness, first of all you have to go through this whole process of getting police approval, then get the police to take the person to the magistrate court and get a magistrate order, which is mandatory before you can take the person in for any kind of care and treatment. So that has been one of the specific challenges of working with homeless mentally ill persons. The other issue is that it takes time to be able to build trust and to be able to provide any kind of safe space. So if in your locality, for example, if you see a wandering homeless mentally ill person, it is not going to be very simple to be able to build rapport with this person, get to be able to build trust with them and get them to come to a safe space to be able to provide care and treatment. So that is another big problem, especially when clients are rescued and brought into mental health care homes. Often in the first week of stay, they report several kinds of problems, that is feeling intimidated with this sort of a quick transition from possibly dangers and uncertainties of the streets to a much more closed setting. But then a closed setting can also mean, while it is safe and not dangerous, can also mean sometimes it's restrictive, and all of this can induce a great deal of trauma, anxiety, and all of that to all the clients, irrespective of how severe is their mental illness, irrespective of their clinical status. This sort of a sudden shift from the streets to a sort of a safe shelter home or something like that can be itself very difficult to cope with, and that is a big challenge in working with homeless mentally ill persons. The next thing that we will look at is looking at rehabilitation and reintegration. Usually the experience of the Banyan model, on the basis of which we are describing some of these interventions about homelessness and mental illness, the usual experience is that within few weeks of the client's entry into the institution, through pharmacotherapy and purposeful engagement, it is possible to ascertain the identity of the client. So one is able to try and figure out who is this person, where have they come from, what is their context, what is the language that they speak, etc. So at the Banyan, in fact, the method that is used is what is called as a storyline reconstruction method, wherein the case manager or the person who's doing work with this homeless wandering mentally ill person who's been brought in to the home, and the personal assistants, they usually take note of the kind of language that the person speaks. So what is the mother tongue, what are they comfortable with? As we know, in India we live in such a sort of diverse country where we have over more than 300 to 400 kinds of languages, and then there are multiple dialects and scripts and so on. So it's important then first to find out what is the dialect language that the person is comfortable in communicating with. It is also important to find out what are the meal preferences of this person. Is this person a vegetarian? Do they eat meat? What are the kinds of food preferences that they have? So often it may happen that the person who is wandering and mentally ill person may have traveled for kilometers together and crossed several kinds of states and ended up at a home, let's say somewhere in South India, and they might be belonging to some region in Northeast. So it's important then to be able to, even as a first step towards any kind of change and recovery of the mental illness, it's necessary to establish the context of this person, ascertain the identity of the person, and figure out some of these basic things that are culturally significant in the person's identity, like their language, food preference, clothing preference, the kinds of clothes that they might be comfortable with. Now this is very important because particularly we see in state-run responses to mental health problems, you might have one kind of uniform that is used by everyone, whereas we all understand that there are cultural differences in the kind of clothing habits of men and women, and not everyone would be comfortable with one kind of clothing that might be imposed. So that's something that is avoided in the Banyan when looking at rehabilitation and reintegration. A detailed biopsychosocial assessment is taken, and a collaborative individual care plan is developed, which is very important in planning any kind of rehabilitation. So while several homeless mentally ill people may have one similar kind of a mental illness or a similar kind of a diagnosis, something like schizophrenia or some other kind of psychotic illness, it is important to do a detailed individual assessment to find out the specifics of this person's situation and the kind of mental health problems that they have. And even in looking at the rehabilitation plan, it has to be an individual tailor-made plan, which again cannot be entirely expert-centric or decided only by the case manager or the social worker. It is to be best done in collaboration with the patient. Need-based combination of various kinds of therapies such as cognitive behavior therapy, behavior therapies, or dynamic behavior therapy, mixed with other kinds of methods such as meditation, mindfulness, trauma counseling, because many of these persons might come from very difficult backgrounds and might have been dealing with several traumatic events in their past. Looking at reality orientation therapy, other other kinds of psychotherapies, role playing, psychodrama, etc. These can be all used depending on what is the need of the patient and what is the assessment that is being done. Skill development is another very important part of any kind of rehabilitation and reintegration. Skill development, particularly to be able to do different kinds of work, right from personal care to doing other kinds of vocational kinds of jobs, and see if there is earning potential that this person has, so that one can look at sort of long-term reintegration back into the community, those kinds of plans. So the next thing we will look at is looking at sort of personal recovery. So we started out looking at a systemic response to the question of homeless mentally ill persons, and it's important from there to sort of come down to looking at individual, what does it mean for each individual to get better and to feel well. So that's what we refer to as the personal recovery, and here we use Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach, where we are saying that recovery involves developing a new meaning and purpose in one's life as one grows beyond the catastrophic effects of mental illness. So while the mental illness might be a large part of the person's life and their story, and the distress associated with that might be a large part of the person's identity, recovery is actually about being able to go beyond that and being able to develop sort of a new, in a fresh, new way, being able to develop a purpose of your life. So in that sense, personal recovery is a deeply personal, unique process of changing one's attitudes, values, feelings, developing new goals, earning or figuring out or learning new kinds of skills, and developing new roles for oneself and for sort of a new life. This recovery actually is a very, very important part of hope, and sort of hope for future, hope for sort of a life which would involve not just being able to deal with one's mental illness, but to be able to have sort of another kind of a fulfilling goal for oneself. So looking beyond illness into the individual as a whole is a very important part of the personal approach, personal recovery approach. We will then look at in the next slide, we will look at Martha Nussbaum's theory of capabilities. This is basically the theory of capabilities is used to understand sort of a shift from mental illness and severe debilitating chronic mental illness to sort of a form of recovery where we are focusing on the person's strengths and capabilities. International evidence to promote recovery among persons with mental health issues has talked about certain kinds of indicators, and it sort of starts with being able to eat, bathe, groom and use the toilets in an unaided manner. This is one of the first steps that one can move in order to promote recovery. Then the ability to communicate meaningfully in an interpersonal sort of a context, ability to be able to use public transport and enhance one's mobility, ability to manage money, then literacy, basic literacy, physical mobility, social skills and being able to meaningfully engage with people around you, ability to manage a household. So a mix of all of this. So personal caregiving, relationships, being able to deal with the world outside, being able to go and access spaces through mobility, being able to manage finances, to moving towards managing a whole household by yourself, ability to get into employment and being able to stay in employment, ability to manage one's medication, sensory functions, ability to protect oneself from all kinds of harms around in the environment, and use of leisure and use of being able to reacquaint oneself with hobbies and habits and things that one enjoyed doing. So some of these are what can be called as steps towards positive recovery. Social support is another very, very important aspect of the recovery narrative of wandering homeless mentally ill persons. Comprehensive support plays a very important role in promoting autonomy, self-determination and dignity of the person. This social support can be in form of sort of direct economic benefits such as employment opportunities being provided to persons with mental illness, education and skilling and learning new skills to be able to support oneself, pensions, so disability pension for example, since since we understand that mental illness is one form of disability, so disability pension given to patients gives patients the element of choice to be able to spend for household needs, meet education expenditure of themselves, of their children, and so on. Healthcare support. So when we are looking at social support activities, actually we are looking at, one is the healthcare and treatment aspects, both of general health as well as mental health problems, and the other is more of sort of social, in the social realm, so education, employment, skills, pensions, and so on. Another aspect of in the recovery narrative is the role of family and the role of sort of intimate relationships in one's life. So reintegration with family is again sort of very important part of the recovery narrative for homeless mentally ill persons. Longing for loved ones and need for family is insatiable for those who live in institutions and those who live in sort of semi-open or quasi-institutional settings. Challenge, of course, often with this population of homeless mentally ill persons lies in being able to even identify the whereabouts of the person's family, because people often wander off under the influence of their mental illness, board trains, and may cross state boundaries, may cross even country boundaries, and often are unable to recall the exact address, where they come from, where they belong. And then there is, of course, the other aspect that when there is mental illness and stigma, the families themselves may not want to own or want to have anything to do with the person who has mental illness. So in fact, reintegration with the family becomes a sort of a double-edged challenge, in that sense that being able to locate the family becomes difficult, and the other is, having located the family may or may not want to have the person back and may not be fully ready for reintegration. But of course, in this whole reintegration, particularly in tracing the family and getting the person back to meet the family, the police and such agencies play a very, very important role. Also NGOs in several areas play a very important role in being able to identify families from where the person has wandered off. The next thing we look at is also the question of aftercare. Global evidence suggests that 40% of clients are lost to follow-up. So you have, while you may have rescued someone with mental illness from the streets, have dealt with all the sort of bureaucratic requirements of paperwork, police, magistrate, etc., have got them into a care and treatment facility, and have done the work of reacquainting, finding out who this person is, finding out their context, and done extensive sort of work with this person, a mix of pharmacotherapy, psychotherapy, counseling, all of that. Having done all this, and then looking at repatriation, reintegration with family, aftercare is also a very, very important part. As we know that with mental illness, very often people might need lifelong or sometimes sort of continued period of care and treatment, and in fact discontinuation of medication, either due to side effects or because of lack of education about the condition itself, or because of lack of access to treatment. So somebody may have been seeking treatment and may have been in a home, let's say in a city like Bombay, but they have now gone back to some rural area where access to treatment may not be possible. So discontinuation of medication, either because of lack of access, or because the medication causes side effects that are difficult to deal with, or because of other kinds of problems like having gone back home and environmental stressors increasing. All of these together can mean sometimes relapse of mental illness, and this relapse of mental illness can also unfortunately sometimes mean once again wandering away from the families and from the home, and sort of recurrence of homelessness. So in that sense, a cycle of homelessness and mental illness that can get repeated. So aftercare is a very, very important part of avoiding this kind of recurrence of homelessness from happening. So periodic follow-ups through telephone and telephone counseling, postal service being used for sending medication to the person if the access to medication is not there in the place that they are in. If possible, and in resource crunch settings it's difficult, but if possible, home visits and staying in touch with the patient who's now an ex-patient, and outpatient care. So if it's possible for the person to stay with their families, or maybe they have sort of started staying on their own and are employed, but some kind of outpatient contact with a mental health professional, being able to come and visit and continuing care and social support is a very important part of aftercare. Social support also in the form of employment, housing assistance, scholarships, etc. It would be an important part of aftercare. Long-term needs is something that has to be also thought through in this process of maintaining recovery. So like I said, that immediate crisis care and treatment is one part, then rehabilitation, reintegration, being able to go back into the community, either into the family or independent living and employment and so on, is an important part. Then there is aftercare, and then there is, one has to also think about long-term needs. We understand that significant percentage of population with mental health needs will require long-term care through institutions or quasi-institutional arrangements, or even in community settings. That is, people may not be sort of well enough to be able to leave the institution, and some who do leave the institution might need monitoring and support and care. So the Banyan's Home Again approach, which is an approach that fosters choice-based inclusive living spaces through rented homes in rural and urban neighborhoods with a range of supportive services for people with persistent mental health issues, is an example of how to deal with these long-term needs. So people who might have mental health problems all through this approach that is there, which is actually also like an assisted living approach, where the person who's the mental health professional or the caregiver or the caseworker is not too far away from the patient, and yet the patient has the possibility of exploring sort of through rented housing some kind of ways of getting out of the institution but continuing some kind of contact with the service provider. So that's about the long-term needs. The next thing is also what Banyan has attempted to do is people of affinity groups living together at these homes, creating a shared space of comfort that mimics a family environment. So this is useful again for people who have long-term continued treatment requirements, as well as those who may not have families, or who may have families who are not willing to take the person back in. Allied supportive services in the form of social care, employment, government welfare, problem solving, social support, leisure, recreation, access to health care, case management services, on-site personal assistance, all of these become important in long-term care. Promising results in terms of managing symptoms, functionality and social inclusions have been recorded through this particular long-term care program of the Banyan. So having now looked at the overall journey from being on the streets and the immediate crisis and treatment responses, to then looking at reintegration, finding family, aftercare, as well as long-term care needs, I will also move on to talk a little bit about what we see as sort of policy and changes that have happened within the policy and law, and how that help in the overall interventions around homelessness and mental illness. Some of the positive developments in the mental health policy are important to highlight here. India has formulated the first national mental health policy in October 2014, and this policy now places a critical focus on the needs of homeless living in poverty and those living within custodial institutions. The policy emphasizes on the need for a dynamic, multidimensional, well-being oriented approach to meet the needs of homeless mentally ill persons. Collaborative efforts have been emphasized upon between local self-government institutions, social welfare and disability departments based on this national policy on homelessness, reflect the importance of preventive and rehabilitative measures that have been highlighted in the policy. Assisted living, inclusive long-term care are considered as important part of care services for this group. Those living in poverty can avail disability allowance, old age pensions, widow pensions, and these will also, as I highlighted earlier, social support mechanisms that will go a long way in being able to deal with treatment needs also of homeless mentally ill persons. Access to other kinds of services such as shelters, soup kitchens, hygiene banks have been mandated in the new policy, and those are some very, very positive developments. We also have the mental health care bill, which is the new mental health law that was recently passed, and that will now actually replace the existing Mental Health Act of 1987. The positive features of the mental health care bill, some of them that are very, very important. One is that the new law decriminalizes suicide. It also emphasizes upon the person's right to choose a preferred method of treatment in the event of mental ill health through use of advance directives and nominated representatives. The new mental health care law talks about improving accessibility of mental health care through public health platforms, affordable services and easy access to care in every district. Now that will go actually a long way in also reducing the number of homeless mentally ill persons that you often see in the cities. So very often it is mental illness that does not get diagnosed, that does not get treated at the right time because of lack of access to treatment, that persons with mental illness then tend to wander off and often end up being in very common experience in working with homelessness and mental illness is that people might get into a train and then they are forcibly asked by the railway guard or the railway police to get off at the last stop, which is often like a big junction in a large city. So that's how you have scores of mentally ill persons from rural India and from various kinds of parts to coming to large city centers. So some of these, if affordable mental health care is available, then some of these might even be averted. The other positive feature of the mental health care bill is medical insurance policies being available for persons with mental illness, for users and survivors. Then in addition to the mental health care bill, there is also the new destitution bill, which is the Persons of Destitution bill. It's called, the destitution bill will replace the old Beggary Prevention Act, which the old Beggary Prevention Act is infamous for the fact that it criminalized begging. And what that meant is that basically people who are poor and destitute and do not have the means to be able to have a shelter, these people could be picked up and criminalized and taken by police into custody. So the old beggary prevention law will be replaced by the destitution bill, which will decriminalize beggary and offer rehabilitation services for persons in destitution. The bill defines a destitute person as anybody above 18 years of age who is homeless, mentally or physically disabled, elderly and infirm, living in a state of poverty and abandonment arising from economic or social deprivation and sustained unemployment. The new bill offers comprehensive medical, psychological and social support services for these key constituents under the bill. So the last bit in conclusion, what I would like to say is that research shows us that 21% of every city is comprised, 21% of every city in India is comprised of people who live without a roof over their heads. 25% of these homeless people suffer from some kind of severe mental illness. So such persons are completely cut off from all forms of human interactions and experience complete loss of economic, political and social capital and experience a great deal of discrimination and hostility. There is an urgent need for innovative outreach programs, community housing, civil society participation to bridge the gap between treatment and rehabilitation for homeless persons with mental illness. So let me just quickly recap what we looked at in this module. We basically looked at intervention and responses, social work responses to the question of destitute, homeless, mentally ill persons. And we sort of started out by saying that the problem at hand is quite large. There have been sort of court directives for shelter homes for homeless persons, but currently we know that they're not in the best possible shape. We then went into understanding the various challenges in working and sort of bringing about recovery and being part of the recovery narrative of homeless mentally ill persons. And in that we looked at examples from the Banyan experiment, which is basically, Banyan is a group, an NGO that works with mentally ill persons located in Chennai in Tamil Nadu. So we looked at the experiences of Banyan in understanding the whole recovery journey of the homeless wandering mentally ill persons. And then we also looked at some provisions within the new mental health policy, the new destitution bill and the new mental health care act, and how they provide support for treatment and for recovery and reintegration and rehabilitation of homeless mentally ill persons. With that I will stop and conclude this module. Thank you very much.